Hi everyone, I'm Ryan Durkee coming to you from the HTL studio in Toronto, and joining me today is Sam Corbett.
That's how you know you belong. You belong. You belong. You belong.
As a founding member of the Sheepdogs, Sam has contributed to the award-winning sound of the band for close to 2 decades, going from his basement in Saskatoon to the cover of Rolling Stone. And now, after a battle with cancer, he's coming out on top with a brand new project and album called NUTANA. Please welcome to the show, Sam Corbett. Hi, Sam.
Hey, Ryan, thanks for having me. That's a very kind intro. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. I mean, it's true. Like, do you ever look back on that and say, wow, like I've been in music for almost 20 years now, maybe even longer?
It's kind of crazy. It's almost hard to think about. Like at the time of the Rolling Stone contest, it was hard to get a lot of perspective of what was happening to my life. And so I thought like, well, maybe ask me in like 10 years how I feel about it. But now that it's been 12 years, I can't really remember a lot of it in like super clear detail. Or it just seems like another lifetime to me. So yeah, it's sometimes I sit back and reflect, but it's harder than you might think.
I mean, that cover, you were the first unsigned act to actually be on the cover of Rolling Stone, which I thought was pretty neat. Do you have that framed somewhere in your place?
I do have one here, yeah. It's first and only. I think that once they ran the contest, they realized that maybe it was not something they necessarily wanted to be doing with the magazine.
Okay.
So I know they had a second contest where you got to be on the back cover, obviously not quite as prestigious.
No.
But I think that, we met Jan Werner, who's like he was the owner of Rolling Stone. I think he sold it now, but I think he liked us, and he was happy that somebody with like a classic throwback rock vibe had won the contest. But maybe they realized that like that wasn't something they wanted to do, or at least they never did it again. So,
well, I mean, now you're the first and only. So I think
exactly, even better. Yeah,
it adds to it.
Yeah, it kind of emphasizes what a once in a lifetime opportunity it was too. So.
Yeah. And since then, you've just been going up from there. And I've listened to the new album, NUTANA, and I'm a big fan. Thank you for sending through the advanced listen. I was wondering, how would you describe the sound visually? If you had to describe like a scene out of a movie or a TV show or something to the music of this album, how would you describe that?
Well, that is a great question I haven't thought about before.
Thanks.
Usually when I get asked to describe the sound, I think it's, somewhat like Sheepdog stuff, maybe a little bit more singer-songwritery or introspective, basically meaning it had some more acoustic guitars or something on it. Although it does have some electric. It's sort of, in a lot of ways, it's the soundtrack to a particular period of time in my life where in 2018, I was diagnosed with testicular cancer, and my wife was 4 months pregnant at the time. And I had to cancel out of some Sheepdogs tours and shows to have my surgery and my treatment and stuff. And so it was a very dynamic, period of time in my life, a lot going on, a lot to think about. And during that time, I wrote a lot of the songs that are on the album. So it's sort of the soundtrack to, if you want to think of a visual thing, think of me sitting at home and, I just come back from getting my radiation treatment and I'm trying to figure out what to do.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And it's interesting because you wouldn't necessarily on a lot of the tracks really piece those two things together because there's such an upbeat vibe to a lot of it. I would describe some of it as a summery, chill vibe. I mean, my favorite song is That Would Be All.
If you could take the broke down fool, well, that would be all I'd want you to do. I'd want you to do. I'd want you to do. I'd want you to do.
I love
Mm.
that song, the harmonies and the guitar, and I hope that that is one of the singles because I'm obsessed with that song. Listening to the album, but you wouldn't necessarily pair what you were going through with that music. Were you writing from a place of just remaining optimistic and positive, and to help you get through that journey?
Sometimes, like that particular song, I'd written quite a few years before I had
Okay.
cancer. Um, and it just been kind of kicking around. And but the lyrics, they are kind of about, maybe somebody who's trying to get a second chance with their romantic partner. I'm fortunate enough that that's not really an issue in my personal life. I have been
Yeah.
with my wife for a long time. Uh, and so, but the lyrics are relatively vague. So maybe they could be about someone who's just trying to get a second chance at anything in life, like maybe, trying to recover from a illness and get a new lease on life. Um, so yeah, I think it's somewhat open to interpretation. But there's other songs on the album that are upbeat sounding that are about kind of sad subjects, or the last song on the album, or one of the last songs of the album, is a kind of a medley that's about me processing my diagnosis and treatment. And so it kind of roughly follows the stages of the 5 stages of grief, right? Which, kind of ends with acceptance. And I think so the last bit of that medley is, kind of reflects that, and is a little bit more upbeat and forward
Yeah.
thinking and positive.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you about that. I'm guessing that's stage five, the track stage
Yeah,
five. Yeah, I was listening to that and I noticed that part way through or halfway through the song, it does totally change the tempo. And you as a drummer, I was gonna ask about the significance of that. The fact that the really the tone of it and the rhythm of it and the tempo of that song changes. So is that kind of is that a good indicator of kind of your journey where it started off a little bit more somber uh and then you have a new hope, a new lease on life by the end of it?
totally. I never thought of it strictly through tempo, but that is a good point. Yeah, I think anybody who goes through that kind of diagnosis, that kind of a process, is gonna have a lot of time to reflect and hopefully take something out of it. And in a lot of ways, like, now that I'm, knock on wood, it's been about 4.5 years, coming up on 5 years in remission.
Yeah.
And all my tests so far have been great, like positive, or there's no indication of the cancer coming back. So as long as that continues to be the case, it's kind of hard to not see it as a bit of a positive. I was very lucky to have a form of cancer that has a very high 5-year survival rate, and high rates of remission and stuff. Like my grandpa, actually, he had testicular cancer
Oh,
in the 1950s, so he would have been like in his 40s, I guess, and he lived to be 93. So
wow.
when I hear things like that, it makes me feel pretty positive. And it definitely did give me, somewhat of a new outlook on life. It's not like I walk around every day with a huge smile on my face and have no problems whatsoever, but like I don't think I would have made this album, or made a album of my own material, if it hadn't been for this. Like, if it hadn't kind of given me a real kick in the butt, and
Yeah.
um, made me realize it was something I wanted to do before I, was out of music, or passed away or whatever.
Wow. And I know that I believe you were 35 when you were diagnosed,
Mhm.
around there, and your wife was pregnant like you talked about. And I believe I read that your first goal was that you wanted to be alive for when your daughter was born. Then the next goal was to be alive long enough that she would remember you. And that really, when I was reading that, that really struck an emotional chord for me. And so how does it feel now that you've gotten to that point, where you've accomplished both of those and you continue to thrive and get to see her grow up? How is that?
Yeah, totally. Like, you don't want to seem, melodramatic or anything like that. But at the time, like when I first found a lump, when I was just in the shower, and I didn't know if that was where the cancer started, or if it had spread from somewhere else, right? Like, you really don't know. And it takes a while before you can, I had to basically book a surgery before they could even run a test on the tumor, right? To see, like, they don't go and
Oh,
test the tumor. So, it was probably about a month before I had had the surgery, and they had ran a test and found that it was cancer. Then you get some follow-up tests where you see if it's spread, to anywhere else in your body. And in my case, it had spread into a lymph node, but luckily a nearby one. So yeah, it's hard for your mind not to go to the worst case scenario, right? And I was thinking, uh, my daughter's about to be born in, 5 or so months.
yeah.
I really want to make it at least that far. And, now she's 4 and we have a second daughter who's about to turn 2.
Wow.
So, I think that our older daughter can at least, if I was to get hit by a bus or something tomorrow, she would at least have some memory of me. And,
Oh,
uh, the younger daughter maybe takes a couple more years, but I definitely, it's good to have to set small achievable goals, and
yeah.
and once you hit them, to move on to the next phase. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And what has it been like to be a dad? How has that changed your life?
it's great. I love it. I really do.
Yeah.
It's something I always knew I wanted to be a part of my life. And it can be challenging, especially in the Sheepdogs. Like, we do a lot of touring. Last year we played like 90 shows.
Wow.
So it's a lot of time on the road. And so that is definitely tough. It's hard on me, it's hard on them, it's hard on my wife to be taking care of them without me around. It was actually a bit of a silver lining for me personally, to the pandemic. Like, in 2020, we only played 5 shows that year, and I think 2021 was maybe like 20 or something like that. So I got to spend a lot more time at home, with Lucy as she's growing up, and with Sally as she was born. So, you know, to me, that was a bit of a upside. And now it's just trying to strike the right balance between, you know, being available when I'm on the road, and being the best dad I can be when I'm at home.
Do they have a grasp of what dad does?
Yeah, I think so, but I don't know if they totally appreciate how unusual it is. You know, like, they know this last weekend me and my wife went to the Junos with the rest of the sheepdogs, and they see photos of it, and they think it's cool, but I don't know if they necessarily realize that the other kids in their class, their parents aren't doing similar things. So,
Yeah.
but we try to really have a lot of music around in the house, like listen to a lot of music. Like, they have their own drum kit, they can play lots of different percussion instruments, and like a little guitar and keyboards and stuff like
Oh,
that. So I don't know. I think hopefully they realize that music is a very special thing, and it becomes a very important part of their life as well. And maybe if that is the case, then they'll look back and think it's pretty cool their dad was able to, have a career playing music. I know
yeah.
that's what I thought, actually, because my dad is a professional musician as well.
Okay.
Same with Ewan and Seamus. Their dad, Neil, is a musician as well. So definitely something that I could see growing up. Although, to be honest, there were times when the classic thing where you like want to rebel against your parents and do the opposite of whatever they are doing. So even though my dad had a really cool job, I wanted to do something else. I don't even know what, be a
Yeah.
lawyer or something, just to be different, right? Different from your
Just
parents.
just rebel. But then I guess your parents probably always see that ability in you, right? And want you to be able to take on the things that you love. And I know that you were starting the band in your basement. With the Sheepdogs, and you went out before it was even the Sheepdogs, and you went to a local music store, and you bought some equipment with a gift card, right? So I was wondering, when you think back to the early days of you in the basement and playing with your friends and creating this music, what do you remember about that time?
Well, yeah, you're totally right about that story. You've done some good research. My dad got a gift certificate to Long McQuaid, for $50 or something like that. He got that as part of like a honorarium for something he did,
Okay.
music related. But so he gave it to me, and it was basically happened to be the exact amount it cost to rent a crappy drum kit for a month. And so I did, and I don't think I had never played the drums before, and
Oh,
I don't think that they had any inkling that I wanted to play the drums. And but I went and got it, brought it home, figured out how to set it up, and then Ewan and Ryan came over that same afternoon and we started the band that day. And that
Wow.
was about coming up on 19 years ago this summer. And we've been in the band ever since.
That's amazing. One gift card changed your life.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, that and listening to a lot of Led Zeppelin, I basically just thought
Yeah.
John Bonham was like the greatest, and I was just listening to a ton of Led Zeppelin, and I just thought, man, if I could play a little bit like that, that would be the greatest thing. And so I would just like be up in my room, stomping on the ground and slapping my legs. And my parents, I don't think, had any idea what was going on up there. Uh, but yeah, and then I don't know, just I can't quite explain it. It just was like a drive inside me that I want to do. I played other instruments before, like I played piano and a bit of bass. I played saxophone and school band and stuff like that, but I never really felt quite the same lure as the drums had, I guess.
Just a quick break. I'd like to thank everyone for listening or watching this episode and ask that you support the podcast by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, following on Spotify, leaving a review, subscribing on YouTube, following us on social media. Those are just a few ways that you can support, and it's all free. So follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, subscribe on YouTube. The username is Here to Listen Pod. That's HEAR, Here to Listen Pod, POD. Now back to the show. I did notice that the song He's a Man is a cover of 'Cause I'm a Man by Tame Impala. So why did you want to put that on the album?
Well, I guess I wanted a break from just everything being about my treatment. And also, one of my favorite songwriters ever is Leon Russell. I think he's one of the best songwriters ever, but his albums would always have covers on them. And a lot of those times, those covers were like very imaginative or like very, extremely different from the original. Like it wasn't just like him singing it over the same basic track at the same tempo and stuff.
Yeah.
So, and when 'Cause I'm a Man came out, the Tame Impala track, me and my wife, we just really, really loved it and listened to it over and over again. I can still kind of remember that day pretty clearly. So it's always been kind of a special song to me. And I had the idea to replace the synth part with a pedal steel. I thought that might sound kind of cool. And then I was like, oh, and then it could be like kind of a country funky version of the song. And then when I started thinking about that, I was like, well, what if it was, the roles were reversed and the song was sung by a woman instead of a man?
Yeah.
And then it would have kind of like a Stand By Your Man, Tammy Wynette kind of a vibe to it. And like I said, because me and my wife really enjoyed the song, I thought, well, we're gonna get her to sing it. And so me and
Yeah.
her worked on the lyrics to kind of convert them a little bit. A lot of them end up being basically the same, but a couple had to be changed to be from the woman's perspective. And she, like me, would kind of sing and play instruments and stuff growing up, but now she has a regular job. And so, it took a little bit of convincing, but now we made this thing that I think is really cool that we collaborated on. It's something our kids can look back on later and say like, hey, it wasn't just my dad that was in the Sheepdogs. My mom sang on this record as well.
Yeah. What was it like collaborating together and working together? Obviously you collaborate with raising your kids and probably in a lot of
Yeah,
other ways, but what was it like to collaborate on music together with your wife?
it was good. It was pretty frictionless. Like I know she knew I had a lot more expertise in the studio and stuff like that. So she wasn't, and I at the same time knew that because she hadn't been there a lot, that, it's not like I was going to grill her and make her do like 500 takes or something like that. So we've been together for a really long time, and I think we have a pretty good understanding of each other. And I think that probably helped and help us realize like, how to navigate a new situation, much like having kids, right? Which has been a new
Yeah.
situation. Yeah.
And she's a great voice.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you'll have to pass along the compliment. I actually wrote in my notes, I was like, who's the female singer on that song, on that
Yeah.
cover? So
Well, she'd
that's
be the
cool.
first to admit she's not like Whitney Houston or something like that, but I think she's got a really cool sounding voice, and I do think it suits the song very well.
Yeah. So there weren't any disagreements when you were working together on music together, you and your wife.
No, I don't think so.
It just flowed well.
Not that I can remember.
That's great. Well, I was going to ask about that because, when you're working together as a band for almost 2 decades and you all are friends as well, how do you deal with disagreements?
Well, depends on the situation. Like, um, in the studio, most of the songs, nearly all the songs we're working on are written by Ewan, our lead singer, right?
Hmm.
So at the end of the day, he sort of gets final say in a lot of things. Now, sometimes he has a pretty clear idea of what he wants the drums to sound like or what he wants the drum part to be. And I actually don't mind that. I like kind of trying to fulfill someone else's idea.
Yeah.
But other times he, just wants to kind of jam something out and see where it goes. And we have a lot of freedom to do what we feel is right. And I obviously enjoy that approach as well. And then he is at least for our last 3 or 4 records, he has been like the producer as well. So, like I said, he has final say, but he's not really a tyrant about that kind of stuff. At least not, I don't find him to be. I
Yeah.
find most of his requests to be pretty reasonable. Now for the NUTANA stuff, I'm the producer, and so
That's
I guess
right.
that makes me in charge to a
Yeah.
certain degree. And so that was something I liked doing. I liked, having that role for a change. And at the same time, I think it um, helps or will help me, has helped, I guess, because we have recorded an album since I recorded this one. Helps me be a better member of the Sheepdogs to be able to see what the other side of those arguments or at least discussions is,
Yeah.
and get that kind of perspective, certainly.
Do you think that this will be, a multiple album project where we're going to see more music as part of Nutana and potentially touring, or are you going to combine it where maybe you'll perform some of the songs on tour? How will that go for fans of the album?
I would love to be, I would love to record some more music. It's obviously I'm pretty busy right now with Sheepdog stuff
Yeah.
um and releasing this album, which has proven to be a lot more work than I thought it would be, or maybe than I realized, I guess. I would love to record some more stuff, maybe record something and be able to release it a little bit quicker. So maybe that means it's like just a single song or like an EP, like maybe 4 or 5 songs might be a better way to approach it, because it took a long time to make this album, going from the treatment to finally getting the courage to record it. And then as soon as you record it, the pandemic hits, and then pandemic's over, and then super busy trying to catch up with Sheepdog stuff. So it's certainly been a long process, and I'd like to be able to create and release stuff a little bit quicker. As far as shows, like I wasn't sure initially if I wanted to, do anything live with it, but now I'm feeling like I would like to. I'm opening up for my friend Ellen Fraze at the end of this month here. Um, and I just had a rehearsal with my band, the band that's going to be backing me up on that show last night. And it's pretty fun. It's a pretty different thing for me to be singing and lead and playing drums, or singing lead and playing keys.
Yeah.
um, it's a definitely a new experience and a new challenge, which is obviously always a good thing, to be challenging yourself. As far as like during Sheepdog sets, like there's a bunch of different Sheepdog side projects. There's Bros, which is Ewan and Seamus. Ewan has a solo album. Seamus just released a solo album as well a couple weeks ago. So we have a lot of material to draw from. Sheepdog
Yeah.
shows have up until this point been just Sheepdog songs, and I think that's probably how it'll go for a while. But you
Okay.
never know. Yeah,
You never know.
you never know.
Well, if you stop by Toronto with the Nutana project, I would love to see that show. I'm excited to potentially hear more. The name Nutana, is that based on your roots of growing up in Saskatoon?
Yeah, for anyone who doesn't know, it's actually just a neighborhood in Saskatoon, right across the river from downtown. That's where I grew up and lived for most of my life. Um, and I also thought it was kind of interesting. Like I just like the way the word sounds. I think
Yeah,
it's appealing, I guess. But also anyone outside of Saskatoon doesn't know what it means necessarily,
yeah,
because it's a word original to Saskatoon. I didn't really want to release something with my name on it. I just felt a little bit weird about that. I remember reading this quote from Dallas Green from City and Color from years ago, where he just said like he didn't want to see his name on a t-shirt. He felt weird about that. And I can kind of relate to that. So I thought I'd use a pseudonym.
Yeah, and I almost feel like in a way, and not everyone is like this, but I feel like for a lot of people, when you're using a different name, you maybe can even get a little bit more creative because there's not so much pressure on who you're defined as, but this is a whole new project, a whole new name. You can kind of make it whatever you want it to be, right?
That's a good point. Like I probably wouldn't have been able to do like that cover with my wife singing if it
Yeah.
had been Sam Corbett record, I guess. I also just like the idea of it being, you know, all the original songs are written by me and I'm singing on lead on all the other tracks, but I had a lot of really great collaborators on this album. Jim Boskill, who was in the Sheepdogs and now in Blue Rodeo, Chris Mason, who was in the Deep Dark Woods, Clayton Lithicum from Casey and Clayton. Actually, Seamus from the Sheepdogs played keys on a couple tracks. My dad played saxophone on a song.
Wow.
Former, talking about him earlier, former Sheepdogs guitarist Leah played on a couple songs. So I had so many great collaborators that I just thought it'd be a little bit more appropriate to have a bit of a pseudonym.
I feel like it's a perfect album going into spring and summer. A lot of it gives me like kind of a cottage. I don't know if you're going for this, but it kind of gives me that cottage summery vibe.
That's great to hear. We often joke that in the Sheepdogs we play lake rock, you know, rock to be consumed on the dock.
Your publicist, Adam, shout out to Adam.
Mm-hmm.
He was telling me that April actually is Testicular Cancer Awareness Month, which I didn't know. And you're releasing this album in April. And I know you had talked about wanting to speak out when you were talking to Movember about your cancer journey and specifically the type of cancer, because
Mm-hmm.
some men may feel embarrassed. Why do you think that is? Why do you think men are embarrassed to talk about testicular cancer?
Well, you know, for me, like when we first announced as the band that I had testicular cancer, we actually didn't say testicular cancer, and it was just because I felt kind of embarrassed for people to be thinking about that part of my body, I guess.
Mm,
But you know, because we just said that had to step away because I had cancer instead of testicular cancer, it actually was kind of a harmful thing because people didn't know if I had like, you know, stage 4 lung cancer or something that was, you know, I was like I said, I was lucky enough to have a pretty treatable form of cancer. Um, but you know, I can't blame people if they thought the worst and were maybe more worried about me than they necessarily needed to be.
mm,
So that was kind of a negative thing. And so I did in 2019, I did team up with Movember to kind of talk about it, like my journey up to that point anyway, and try and destigmatize it a little bit, which I think is pretty important. You know, like I'm the type of person, like I've always been a bit of a hypochondriac. So as soon as I felt something, I got it checked out right away. But that's not the
mm,
case for everyone. You know, some
yeah,
people are, you know, just, you know, not as inclined to do it, or maybe just leave it and hope it goes away.
yeah.
Another part of my story is, you know, like I said, I had to leave a couple of Sheepdogs tours to get my treatment, but I didn't want to do that. And I was initially going to postpone my treatment so I could stay on the tours because I was,
Really?
yeah, because I mean,
Wow.
I didn't want someone else playing drums with them, I guess, even though it ended up being a couple really good friends of ours that did it.
Yeah.
It was just, I didn't want that to happen. So I was like, oh, I'll just wait and get my treatment after the tours. But I eventually, thankfully, gave my head a shake and thought, what the hell am I doing? You have to get this done as soon as possible. Like it might not make a difference, but it definitely could.
Yeah.
So that would definitely be a message that I want to spread. And so when my album was going to come out, I messaged Movember just to see if they'd be interested in, you know, doing an update on me. And they
Yeah.
said, yeah, this is great. It's TCAM in April. And I said, what the heck's that? And they said Testicular Cancer Awareness Month. So I had not planned that whatsoever, but just ended up being a little bit of good fortune, I guess, good timing.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing your story here on the podcast and with Movember, and you know, speaking to something that maybe some people would be nervous to speak about or embarrassed, because you're really helping to encourage others to take charge of their health, especially men, because I feel like a lot of men don't. maybe some people in their
Mm-hmm.
lives may say you should get that checked out, but a lot of men maybe don't, or they're putting their career ahead of their health, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad that you're speaking about that, and thank you for that. I did notice in your song Stage 5, you had a lyric in there where you said he called you half a man. And I wanted to, if you're comfortable with that, I'd love for you
Mm-hmm.
to share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, that's just the idea of like, so I did have surgery, so like to get too graphic or whatever, but I only have one testicle now. So, that actually does not really bother me that much now that it's actually true for me. Maybe I thought that that would bother me more than it
Mm,
actually did. Like I basically never think about that. It doesn't matter at all. And I'm able to live my life. And I think what ends up happening is, for me anyway, hormonally, it hasn't been an issue. Maybe it is for some people, but maybe that I was worried that for some people they would perceive it that way, that I'm, not as masculine as
mm,
other men. And it sounds dumb to say that out loud because I really don't care about that. That's not what it's all about for me. But um, I also talk about lifetime a half a man. So that kind of just dovetailed into the idea that like, oh, my life expectancy just went down by a whole bunch by, having had cancer, right? So that'd be like another way that I could be half a man, like have half a lifetime,
wow.
potentially, or, you know, if I hadn't gotten anything done, I definitely would have had half of a normal life expectancy. So it's just kind of like a bunch of kind of random thoughts that came together to be the lyrics of that song, I guess, and
Yeah.
was sort of reflecting, um, maybe a more angry time period when I was thinking about it.
Mm. Well, thanks for getting vulnerable. I'm sure there's some people out there that can relate. I mean, hopefully there's much more than half a life. I mean, look at your grandpa. You said,
Mm-hmm.
he got through testicular cancer, and you said he lived to like 90, 95,
93, yeah. And
93.
so yeah, he
Wow.
smoked too. So maybe he just had I don't know. He's made of the old stock where he grew up on a farm in Saskatchewan. So real, yeah.
Yeah. What would be your favorite lyric that you've written on this album?
Well, I do have I'm not sure when this podcast is coming out, but the album comes out April 7th, but there is one song available right now called You Belong
Mhm.
on streaming, or there's a video for it. Um and that song is not about cancer. It's just sort of about the idea of like imposter syndrome. I think a lot of,
Mhm.
people, successful people or whoever, I certainly know that a lot of musicians kind of suffer from that, like basically like doubt your abilities and maybe don't feel like you deserve your success. I know that's something I've thought about a lot. Um, and so that song is about like sort of confronting the imposter syndrome and just being proud of who you are, I guess. At least that's what the song is about for me. And again, I tried to write the lyrics a little bit on the vague side, so maybe somebody else would have a different interpretation, which is great. But um, I was pretty happy with how those lyrics turned out. It's interesting, like when you put out an album to upload it to streaming services, you have to like write out all the lyrics, like kind of how they're sung in the song and stuff like that. So I recently did that, and when you go through it, sometimes you think like, wow, that's actually pretty cool, and then other times you're
Yeah.
pretty embarrassed by what you wrote, but that's okay too. I guess if you weren't embarrassed by it, then it means you haven't grown since the time you wrote it. Or
I mean, it can be kind of like a journal, right? You're
yeah.
basically you're writing almost as if it's journal. And I've said this in another episode, but as a musician, you're kind of releasing that journal to the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
For the world to see and decipher what the meanings are behind it. Sometimes it's maybe better to keep it vague because they may assign their own meanings to it that are impactful to them. It could be totally different than what you had intended.
Yeah, my favorite lyrics are definitely like that. Like Steely Dan is a band that I really like, and um, there's not maybe a ton of like musical influence on my album, but lyrically, definitely there is. When their lyrics are definitely open to interpretation,
Yeah.
and yeah.
I have one final question for you, Sam,
Sure.
which is I like to ask all my guests this, which is if you had a movie or a book made about your life, what would the title of that be?
Wow, that's a great question. Usually with musicians, it ends up being like the name of like one of their iconic songs or something like that. So like the Sheepdogs story would be like Feeling Good, the Sheepdog story or something like that, or I don't know, the autobiography of Ewan Curry or something like that. So I guess you'd have to pick the name of one of the songs of from my album. So I don't know. Maybe You Belong would be a good one. Maybe That Would Be All, or you know, I'll let the listener decide which one best sums it up. Maybe if I thought about it for a little longer, I could get a better answer.
I'm a fan of That Would Be All. Again, I love
Okay.
that song, and it sounds kind of like almost like the end of a play or something,
Sure. Yeah,
for
yeah.
now. Maybe there's a continuation of it, but that would be all for now. So I
Let's
I
go.
think that
Yeah,
could
let's go with
fit.
that. That sounds like a good
Yeah.
answer. That's a good book title. Yeah.
I would totally read that book or
I
watch
would
that
like
movie.
to, I mean, I would like to write the book about my life at some time, maybe if I, whenever we retire, which is hopefully not anytime soon. But I enjoy writing and I would love to write something, but unfortunately I can't really remember. Like I said, a bunch of the stuff that has happened. I used to write these like blog posts for um Saskatoon kind of underground paper.
Okay.
Um, and I was reading one of them the other day, and I was like, I couldn't believe this stuff in there. I was like, I don't remember any of this stuff. I'm glad I wrote it down. It makes me wish I'd written more. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what was there a story that stuck out to you?
Back then, I was reading about, and it was kind of topical because the Junos were just happened, but I was
Yeah.
reading a post I had written about when we played the Junos in 2014. We played a medley of BTO songs um, to help induct them into the Juno Hall of Fame or Canadian Music Hall of Fame. And it's uh, it's quite the story. Uh, it was a very stressful but ultimately very rewarding experience.
Why was it stressful?
Well, it's you know the performance was live on TV, but they wanted it to sync up to this video of people that people had sent in of them singing along to Taking Care of Business.
Oh, okay.
But the original Taking Care of Business is not performed to a click. So they thought they would edit this version of Taking Care of Business and then, had to play along to it. So they had tapped out this click. But, usually a metronome is like very consistent, like tut, 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 tut.
Yeah.
But this was like tut, 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 tut. Like it was like speeding up and slowing down all over the place because
Oh,
it was it was editing together the different parts of the song that weren't originally played to a click. So no one was hearing it but me, and everyone else is trying to play along to me, and it was a
yeah.
total nightmare during rehearsal. And luckily, I can't even really believe how lucky this was.
Yeah.
Looking back on it, right before we were about to play it on air, I just tested it out in my in-ear monitors, and it was only working on one side. And I just said, you know what, screw it, like take it out. And the guy was like, no, 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 I'm gonna leave it in. Like, no, 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 listen to me, take it out. And this is like it was already live on air. They're presenting an award on the other side of the arena. I was like, take it out
Wow.
right now. Then we started the performance, and like big surprise, it went way better than any of the rehearsals because it didn't have this stupid click thing in it.
So it's almost like you did it from memory, like without the click, you just did it and it flowed and it matched.
Yeah, well, the arrangement was easy enough to remember, but it was just like I was able to listen to the band and respond to how they were playing and not try and slow them down at unnatural times and
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was very lucky. I can't even believe it because I mean it just really sucked to try and play to that uneven metronome.
Yeah.
Maybe some people can do it, but I can't. So
Yeah. Well, thank you, Sam, for opening up and getting vulnerable and sharing your story. And I'm so excited for everyone else to hear NUTANA. And I can't wait to see what's next for you. So thanks
My
again.
pleasure, man. Thanks so much for having me. Like I said, out April 7th. You can find me wherever on social media. It's often NUTANA Band. Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it.